next speaker is Moritz Frenzel from Zero Europe. You saw him before already on the opening, but this time he is not talking about DENOG, but actually what he's doing for a job. We will learn about submarine cables. And in my experience, we all sort of know they are all important for the internet. How? Why? Moritz will tell us that. Enjoy.
Hey everyone, and thank you for joining me on this introduction to submarine cables. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Moritz, and in this talk I'm here, as Franziska mentioned, with my work hat on, which is the head of Global Ways by Zero Europe. I do wear other hats from time to time, one being the vice chairman of DENOG and organizer of this lovely conference, the other being network architect at Stuttgart AX, running a small, beautiful internet exchange in lovely Stuttgart that you should definitely appear at. But anyway, I'm here with my work hat on, so let's focus on that one. Though outside of the networking world, I'm 30 years old. I love 3D printing, if you couldn't tell by the life-size B1 battle droid in my kitchen, and I'm based in Munich. Also, I'm currently building a full-scale R2-D2 with all the fancy motors and beeping and stuff. It's this craziest project I've taken on in a long time, but that's a story for another time. Some of you who know me a bit longer may remember me and be wondering why I'm standing here talking about submarine cables. After all, for the past 10-ish years, on and off, I've been operating a network in Stuttgart, and a cable through the river Neckar wouldn't really justify as a submarine cable, all right? Well, about 1 year ago, we sold Global Ways, the Stuttgart-based network operator, to a company called Zero Europe, and suddenly I've gained access to a much bigger network, including submarine cables. And if you couldn't tell by the life-size battle droid in my kitchen, I'm a huge nerd, and that's like giving candy to a 5-year-old. So, for those of you who don't know Zero Europe, you've just seen the map. We're a Tier 1 carrier and operate roughly 2.3 million kilometers of fiber across Europe, most of which is fully 400 gig enabled. And most importantly for this talk, we own 5 subsea cables between Europe, the UK, and Ireland. So, let's dig deeper into that region. Looking at the map between the UK on the left and the Netherlands on the right, we can see 9 cable systems across the North Sea. This should already solve the most obvious problem we have: geographical diversity into the country. Most likely, the small geographical differences here would have almost no impact on latency. So let's explore together why there are so many and what the differences are. So now you may think, okay, these may be old systems, and they are. Most of these cables are in the water since the 90s. With a few exceptions that were commissioned since 2020. Cable age and advances in technology are, of course, a relevant factor, but play a less important role in such short segments. We're looking in the 200 to 250 kilometer range here. So let's look at one of our cables in this segment, Searcy North. Searcy North travels between Lowestoft in the UK, which is east of London, and Zandvoort, which is west of Amsterdam, owned by Zero Europe. It consists of 48 G654 fibers and spans lengths of 201 kilometers. Back in 1999, we burrowed it at roughly a meter into the seabed. However, over the past 25 years, the tides and movements in the seabed over time caused parts of the cable to resurface. In its 25 years of service, it was hit with quite some abuse, causing multiple breaks over the period. We'll look into these breaks in just a bit. So, why do submarine cables break? The most relevant answer is rarely on their own, actually. The next picture is nothing for the faint of heart, though. It shows one of the fiber cuts we've seen 85 kilometers off the coast of Zandvoort. And I can already feel your pain. Just by seeing the sheared metal here, you can tell this wasn't done by your friendly neighborhood wire shark, but actually by something a bit stronger. So what causes these damages? The most obvious answer would probably be an anchor, right? Well, sadly not. Only once was this cable hit by an anchor, and all other damages were caused by fishing trawlers. More precisely, a beam trawl, which you can see on the right. Now, these devices have been introduced to the fishing community around 2010 and are meant to reduce the drag that the fishing trawlers have on their nets, thus cutting the ship's fuel bills and ultimately saving money, which is probably also even a bit better for the environment. So a very good thing for the fishing industry, but not so much for the cables on the seabed. This front wing of the beam trawl, it's roughly 3 meters in size, is meant to glide 1 or 2 meters above the seabed, but it doesn't always. And when it doesn't, well, you can see what happens on the left. For cables in shallower waters, like the North Sea, which is something between 20 and 45 meters deep in that area, this is the most likely fault scenario. But it's not always the fishermen. Submarine cables aren't safe from geopolitical conflicts either. You may remember, and this was also the motivation for this talk, that damages to submarine cables in Africa made the news, and it was heavily discussed if this was an accident or an act of terror. After long debate, it was concluded that the Houthi militants shot and ultimately sunk the Rubimar, which is the ship you can see on the left, which shortly after the attack dropped an anchor and it dragged it across the seabed, most likely damaging 3 submarine cables and impacting roughly 25% of traffic in the region. So this is hopefully something we don't see too often, but this accident raised awareness that submarine cables, much like our infrastructure ashore, aren't protected from terrorists, and we need to consider threats along the entire route when designing our networks. We've got a lot of experience in actually protecting our cable assets, having diversity on land, but at sea it's a bit different. Obviously, this case in particular is a disaster in itself. I wouldn't even dare to comment on the geopolitical situation in the area. But the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait here uniquely illustrate that it's not only about latency and geographical diversity. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait borders 4 different territories, and the political support or administrative overhead to repair an impacted cable heavily depends on the respective government support and your provider's contacts in the area. In case of this Rubimar incident, cable repairs took significantly longer, as repair crews weren't too keen on being shot at, which, I mean, can't fault them for, right? The Houthi rebels had promised safe passage to the world, but it's absolutely understandable that the repair crews demanded military escorts, and I'm certainly that the liability negotiations with the insurers weren't the breeze either to get over there. It is a very extreme example, and we can all hope that we never encounter this in our professional careers. But ultimately, if we plan for global networks, it doesn't hurt to cover all failure scenarios in the design phase of a network. So let's stop with politics and let's get back to the tech side of things. Our cable is broken and in urgent need of repair. How do we fix it? When cables break, there is no easy option. You'll need to dispatch a cable ship, as you can see on the right, to the location. The ships often take days or weeks to arrive and may also be impacted by global events. You can all remember the Ever Given being stuck in the Suez Canal back in 2021, which delayed repairs for some cable systems for quite a bit. Additionally, there's only 60 to 80 cable ships in the world, depending on where they currently are, if they're in maintenance or broken down or whatever. So you definitely need to have agreements with your repair crews before the fault, and you should also quiz your providers if they have before the fault. It's therefore still inevitable to have geographical diversity, which some submarine cables even offer as part of their design, automatically making the switch over in case something breaks. Once this cable ship, then after its days or weeks-long journey, arrives at the fault location, it first needs to be located. I mean, yes, we can do OTDR measurements, but it's a rough sea out there, so things change, you have to adapt to the given constraints, and it's also not always sunshine out there, and sometimes repairs just can't happen because, well, it's a thunderstorm out there or anything like that. So this may cause additional delays. Now, we've covered most of the things that can go wrong, and we know how to recover, just send out a ship, but how can we prevent that from happening? Naturally, you can decrease the likelihood of damage to your cable system by ensuring that its location is plotted across all naval maps. However, the importance of these cables isn't always known to all fishing crews. Therefore, it's customary to raise awareness for this by regularly visiting ports and educating fishing fleets. If you ever visit one of the prominent ports, such as Lowestoft in the UK, you'll also see signs and contact information and further details by many submarine cable operators. There's also organizations such as the European Subsea Cable Association, which are taking a more active role in supporting us operators to raise awareness with the fishing industry, the oil and gas companies, who obviously also want to run their pipelines and cables, and even the fishing gear manufacturers to improve the overall situation. In addition, most of you probably know Flight Radar. It also exists for ships. It's called marinetraffic.com, and it's not powered by ADS-B as it would be in airplanes, but AIS. there are providers out there which closely monitor AIS data and alert ships in close proximity via an email or Inmarsat Telex, which is like a fancy and very expensive satellite SMS, to, well, be careful because the cable system is right out there. However, not all ships are equipped with AIS, such as small airplanes aren't always equipped with ADS-B. And some even choose to disable it when fishing illegally, which also happens quite often in the night, which is where guard vessels come into play. Guard vessels aren't nothing special rather than ships patrolling the cables. And they can establish VHF communication with vessels that would be invisible on AIS, be it due to legal or illegal operations. And they also act as a visible and audible deterrent along the route. This is obviously operationally expensive and not the most environmentally friendly solution, having a ship out there patrolling your cable 24/7. So we've been operating this cable for 25 years now, and we've had all these efforts deployed and even had guard vessels out there for a good period of time. Nevertheless, Cersei North has taken quite some beating over its 25 years. As you can see, almost all the damages on here were caused by fish trawlers. So is this something that we should just live with and accept and expect our customers to accept 1 or 2 weeks of downtime every other year? At Zayo, we power the infrastructure of some of the most demanding customers in the world. We power almost all of the hyperscalers out there and also almost all of the banks out there. So really coming up and saying, hey, it's the seas, right? Got to expect 1 to 2 weeks of downtime. It's just not a thing we can do. So we need to find a better solution, and we did. Allow me to introduce you to Zeus. Zeus is one of our cables on the same route from Lowestoft to Sanford. And I can already hear some of your eyebrows being raised. Don't worry, we didn't spend tens of millions just for the fun of it building a cable on the same route. Yes, Zeus is on the same landing stations. After all, this is one of our most popular routes in Europe, and from a sheer bandwidth demand. But its path is fully diverse from our existing cable, and the team made a significant effort to get it right. Which is the perfect segue for me to talk about what it takes to build a submarine cable. At first, obviously, you start at the drawing board. You make a plan, go to the authorities, which is a challenge of its own, given that the cable has 2 ends in 2 different countries, with 2 different languages, 2 different jurisdictions, and it's always the unthankful paperwork that takes most of the time. And doesn't have any nice pictures to share from me with you, so just imagine someone sitting there over weird forms in Dutch, burying their heads and thinking what to fill in there. But most certainly it's the most important work of all, because otherwise we couldn't even get started. Well, maybe after coming up with the business case. Once you've finally done all the paperwork and everything has been sorted, you'll need to figure out what it is you're working with. So you bring out all the fancy maritime measurement tools, sonars and stuff like that, and start to survey the seabed. This will leave you with a list of locations you'll want to further investigate. 350 in our case, on only those 200 kilometers. And sometimes you find something you don't want to find, an unknown acronym that you will need to figure out what it actually means. In our case, it's a 500 kilogram UXO, or unexploded ordnance. So, given the geography and the history of all these things, this is to be expected, but still nothing you wouldn't want to see. We did not only find 1 of these, but 4. 3 in the UK, which required the British Navy to come over after inserting some dollars. And then they come over, and they move it. The 4th, though, was in Dutch naval territories. And these guys have another approach.
4, 3, 2, 1, afvuren. We gaan draaien.
Yeah, that's a more proactive approach to it. So we finally cleared the seabed and arrived at the beautiful coasts of Sandford. Nothing can go wrong, right? Quick show of hands. Who had enthusiastic Dutch Formula One fans on their bingo card? No one? Okay, well, they started there. It was a concern when we did the landing, but after all, it wasn't too much of an issue. But after all the UXOs, and we found the fourth one just a few weeks before landing, so the team was actually quite shocked. It was another unexpected event that we needed to take care of. All right, finally, the moment we've all been waiting for. Everything's planned, permitted, the cable is manufactured, the ship is ready, and we're good to go. So on the left, you can see the beginning of the cable on the ship, which will be installed by a NEXense CapChat trenching system. Fancy word for this beautiful yellow thing. This seemingly small machine shouldn't be underestimated, though. It packs two 420 kilowatt water pumps, so almost a megawatt in pumping power. And it drives across the seabed with a trenching power of up to 16 bar. And it buries the cable 2 to 3 meters deep in the seabed, protecting it from the elements. After weeks of effort, then, you'll travel across the sea. You will encounter all the bad weather. Teams are rough at sea, trenching systems going on. You'll finally make it across the North Sea and over to Sandford, where the cable's double armor is carefully stripped away and the delicate fibers are revealed, allowing us to serve our customers one of the fastest and most reliable routes between Amsterdam and London. Here you can see the armoring basically being terminated and being turned over to the small, very tiny small fibers on the left, which are then mounted in a splice tray, as you would do in just any other fiber deployment, and then ultimately terminated at the cable landing stations and provided to our customers. So for simplicity during this presentation, and looking at the time, I could have probably gone into a bit more. We only looked at unamplified cables in these presentations. Everything that spans roughly above 240 kilometers requires repeaters, and we'll see this in David's presentation from EXA in just a second. Repeaters will be spaced every 50 to 80 kilometers on the seabed along the cable and are powered from the shore with 10 kilowatts or more of DC power. There's also branching units along the routes that may be placed in the seabed to split a cable for different routes offshore to allow for drop-offs at some points and, yeah, basically more different routing. And also there are many other interesting applications for submarine cables, and I'm sure David will go into a bit more detail about this in just a second. So to wrap all of this up, let's summarize the most important points of the lifelines of our modern world. As we've learned, just because they are at seabed, submarine cables aren't safe from damages, which is oftentimes caused by illegal or uncautious fishing activities. To circumvent this, our best option is to just bury the cables at least 2 meters deep. So if you're looking to procure a new submarine cable route, ensure that the carrier of your choosing understands all these threats, the potential dangers, and implements safeguards accordingly. Ultimately, though, no submarine cable will be safe from outages. So please ensure you've got a full geographical diversity and understand all your failure scenarios, and also consider politics along the route. Now, that's a wrap. I think we have more than enough time for questions. I'll be happy to take a few, or else feel free to talk to me or to my lovely colleagues shown on the slide for any questions about Zeus, our European network, recent expansion in Germany. We're also hiring, so if you want to feel like a 5-year-old in the candy store again, check the job board or talk to the team. Thanks for your time and interest, and I'm now looking forward to some questions.
Thank you.
Mark Haber, freelance IT consultant. Thank you for this very unusual and interesting lecture. On that map you showed of that African part of the Red Sea, we have learned that those cables sometimes cross. How many hours do you have to lecture on that topic?
Well, this map is not accurate, right? This is just a topology map, though. If cables cross, it's as always, as it would be in terrestrial routes. You were talking about this one, right? Get a KMZ, make sure it's fully measured in, compare what's going on there, and find out. And ultimately, You will see if your provider actually can describe it in full detail and will give you these details. Obviously going to require NDAs. Or if you don't, well, rather go for a different route than expecting the documentation to be fully accurate on submarine cable systems.
Hello, Max Stumpf, NetBlance. You were talking about UXOs, and as we've learned that they aren't always removed, why can't you just lay the cable around the UXO with a couple of meters spare?
Because you have a fully measured in and approved path, and if you want to divert from it, you basically have to go back to the drawing board, get everything approved again, because after all, it's naval territories of some nation. Yeah, so you can't just make that decision, as you wouldn't be able to do it in terrestrial routes either.
Okay, so it's paperwork related.
Basically.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Do we have something on venuless? Okay, then, thank you, Moritz.